Few weapons look as crude or unassuming as the Sten gun. Yet few have had a greater impact on modern warfare. Born from desperation in Britain's darkest hour of Second World War, the Sten was never designed to be elegant or refined. It was designed to be built fast, built cheap, and put into as many hands as possible. From British soldiers guarding against invasion, to resistance fighters sabotaging Nazi occupation, to insurgents decades later, the Sten became more than just a stopgap weapon. It became a symbol of irregular warfare, improvisation, and the brutal realities of conflict. This video explains how the Sten came into existence, how it was used by the SOE and resistance groups across Europe, and how its legacy stretched far beyond the Second World War, including its use in conflicts that you would never imagine. This is the Sten gun, the tube that helped save Europe. The Sten gun was born out of crisis, improvisation, and necessity, and few weapons better reflected the pressure Britain faced in the early years of the Second World War. After the evacuation from Dunkirk, the British Army had lost vast quantities of equipment and faced the real threat of German invasion. Submachine guns were urgently needed to rearm the army and the Home Guard, but the only viable option at the time was the American Thompson, which was expensive, heavy, and slow to supply in the quantities required. Britain needed something cheap, simple, and fast to produce, and the result was the Sten gun. The name Sten came from its creators and its birthplace, Shepherd and Turpin of the Royal Small Arms Factory at Enfield. As you can see, the gun itself is brutally simple. It is blowback operated, open bolt, firing the 9x19 Parabellum cartridge, the same ammunition used by the German forces. Stamped metal parts, minimal machining and crude welding meant that the production could be spread across small workshops rather than relying on major factories alone. Some variants could be assembled in just a few man-hours, and the most basic versions consisted of fewer than 50 parts. Compared to the Thompson, which cost many times more and required far greater industrial effort, the Sten was astonishingly economical. For the price of a single Thompson, Britain could produce well over a dozen Stens, a fact that mattered enormously to an army rebuilding itself under the shadow of invasion. In British and Commonwealth service, the Sten gun had a mixed reception. It was light, compact, and deadly at close range, giving infantry sections a level of firepower that bolt-action rifles simply could not provide. Its rate of fire made it controllable in short bursts, and at the short distances typical of urban fighting and jungle warfare, it was lethal enough. At the same time, its crude manufacture and its open bolt design made it prone to stoppages and accidental discharge, especially in the early wartime examples. Simply dropping the Sten gun lightly would see the bolt move slightly, and in cases where it was dropped hard enough, the round could discharge. There are many examples of people being killed by these weapons by accidental discharge, including one in the intelligence services. Poor magazines, dirt, and careless handling could also all cause failures. And soldiers learnt quickly that holding the magazine was a recipe for disaster. A famous example of its unreliability was during Operation Anthropoid, carried out by Czech resistance members who were trained by the SOE, who were looking to assassinate Reinhard Heinrich. As they stepped out in front of his vehicle, ready to fire, the gun didn't fire. Despite all this, later production Stens were far more reliable than their reputation suggested, and many troops came to value them when they were properly maintained and understood. Where the Sten gun truly came into its own, however, was not used with conventional armies, but in the hands of resistance movements and clandestine forces. Its simplicity, slim profile, and ease of disassembly made it ideal for irregular warfare. A special operations executive who were tasked with supporting resistance groups all across Europe adopted the Sten as a standard weapon for supply drops. Thousands were parachuted into France, Poland, Yugoslavia, and beyond, often accompanied by suppressed variants designed specifically for assassination and sabotage. The Mark II suppressed Sten, with its integral silencer and reduced muzzle velocity, became a signature weapon for SOE operatives, resistance fighters, and special forces, allowing sentries to be killed quickly and patrols ambushed with minimal warning. Resistance groups quickly learned not just how to use the Sten, but how to repair it, how to modify it, and even how to make it themselves. In occupied Poland, underground workshops produced thousands of Sten copies, including local variants such as the Polski Sten and the... I can't pronounce that. often using parts disguised as civilian industrial components. The fact that such weapons could be built in secret under Nazi occupation just goes to show how brilliant the original design was. For partisans, the Sten represented more than firepower. It was a symbol of Allied support and a practical tool that allowed lightly equipped civilians to challenge heavily armed occupying forces. In places like France and Italy, the image of a partisan carrying a Sten became iconic, representing resistance, defiance, and the possibility of liberation, and especially in any media that depicts paratroopers. In fact, by the end of the war, it was one of the most produced weapons of World War II, and the second most produced submachine gun of World War II. But the Sten's influence didn't just end with the liberation of Nazi Germany. Its widespread distribution meant that huge numbers remained in circulation long after the war, finding their way into conflicts across the globe. It saw service in Korea, the Middle East, Southern Asia, and Africa, used by regular armies, insurgents, guerrilla movements alike. Israel manufactured its own Stens during the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, while both sides in numerous post-war conflicts employed the weapon due to its availability and simplicity. In Ireland, the Sten gained a particularly grim legacy during the Troubles. Large numbers of surplus Stens had entered Ireland following the Second World War, and the weapon became one of the most commonly used submachine guns by the IRA from the 50s onwards. During the IRA border campaign of the late 1950s and early 60s, and later through the Troubles, the Sten was used against British forces, police and political targets. Ironically, a weapon designed to defend Britain during its darkest hour was now being turned against it. By the time the Sten was finally withdrawn from service and replaced by the Sterling, it cemented its place in history. It was never elegant, particularly comfortable, and often derided by those who preferred more traditional firearms, yet its impact was immense. It armed British soldiers when nothing else could, empowered resistance movements across occupied Europe, and enabled clandestine warfare by the SOE, and continued to shape conflicts decades after the war ended. The Sten gun stands as a reminder that effectiveness in war is not always about refinement or beauty, but about simplicity, availability, and being good enough when it matters most. The Sten gun I've been showing you throughout the video is a Sten gun Mark II, which is held at the Military Intelligence Museum in Chicksands. If you'd like to learn more about the II, and its use by the SOE or intelligence agencies, please give them a visit. And I also want to thank them for allowing me to make this video and allowing me to play around with this gorgeous piece of metal. The Sten gun story is one of contradictions. It was mocked for its appearance, criticised for its rough construction, and feared for its occasional unreliability. Yet it proved decisive in the hands of those who needed it most. Well, apart from Operation Anthropoid, of course. It helped Britain survive a moment of existential threat, armed resistance movements fighting occupation, and empowered guerrilla forces long after the war that created it had ended. The Sten was never meant to be timeless, but its simplicity ensured its survival across decades of warfare. In the end, the Sten gun remains as a reminder that history is not always shaped by perfect tools, but by weapons that are available when necessity leaves no other choice. And finally, let me leave you with a very funny quote about the Sten gun, and that is that the gun is only accurate within 10 meters if you throw it. And lastly, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave it a like, subscribe and turn that bell notification on, share the video with your friends, and most importantly, leave me a comment letting me know what other videos you'd like to see and what other guns you'd like to see me do next. Because sometimes history doesn't need a rewrite, it just needs to be told properly.